how good or bad is this kind of morass of data that we have that's out there now? Is it, just waiting for someone to come and clean it up? Is it like a lost cause and we're going to spend 15 years trying to clean it up? Just give us some sense of the spectrum that you see out there.
Data integrity is a key differentiator. It's not the only differentiator, because there are other problems, the models, right? So that it's a two-headed challenge, right? Better data is better, right? More data isn't better. To your point, how bad is the data we have today? It's generally bad, right? Because data tends to decay. The challenge isn't training AI, but cleaning, structuring, and orchestrating the healthcare data so the computational models don't make these kind of dangerous mistakes that we were talking about. The medical decision models inherit the biases of the training data. So that leads to the disparities in the treatment recommendations. And when you have incomplete or you have decayed data, and then you have it in a model that's making, terribly biased, decisions, and then it's compounded by hallucination, that's where we're at today. So it's a little bit of a myth, the AI in healthcare, because it's largely, again, just the pattern recognition, statistical modeling, and it's based on, kind of brutally not great data sets.
So I've heard you mention a few times in this conversation and our other conversations, this idea of data decay. So how does data decay? Like, I always think of it as like, we recorded it, someone wrote it down, that's that, unless it's like, the photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy, like the actual decay, like, people worry about the quality of music going down, but like, what's data decay that, as you see it?
So it's the slow breakdown of the accuracy, relevance, and usefulness of data sets over time. So a patient's health status is constantly evolving. Models are trained on stale or static data, then you get outdated recommendations, right? You check a chart. The reason you check a chart is that you want the most updated information. It works exactly the same in these systems. So even small shifts, like a new diagnosis or a medication change or a lab result, all of these things can invalidate a data model. And so that is what I mean when I talk about decay. It exists in other forms too. And really that's when we started the company, that's where we started, because your name could change, right? You get married, you could become a doctor, you can, all these things can happen.
Right.
You can change your phone number, you can change your address, you can change your job. And so that, again, that people data is decayed data. And in terms of the value of data in the world, people data is the most valuable data. Health data, in terms of people data, is the most valuable people data. And, part of the reason why is obviously we have arbitrage around that exists. There's an arbitrage framework around that. But the other part of it is like everyone's constantly after kind of the most current version of that information.
Where I've run across this before is actually in guideline development, even guideline or evidence-based guidelines from the literature. And one of the thought problems or thought experiments that we went through in just a different working group I was on was the difference between if the standard of care has changed, and doctors are pretty good about knowing the next greatest things, and pharma companies deliver new drugs or someone comes up with a new technique, right? And people are excited about it. And so we're in the process of kind of generating the future. The now is happening, but the guidelines, the standard of care, right? The things that get paid for, right, by insurance companies are based on the guideline or the protocol that was written based on data from 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, right? And when we see this lag, that creates this really weird bias where all of a sudden you're having medicine, right, or care only available to a subset of people, for instance, who could afford to pay for it because the payment systems haven't caught up with the evidence of the new sort of thing. Is this the kind of decay? Like we're just not bringing it fast enough?
So you've hit on like three of what I consider the four forms of decay. One is the temporal decay that you were talking about. So old data that no longer reflects our current reality. Structured decay, where we're changing formats or schemas to, that they'll break that compatibility of that kind of data. And there's the contextual decay, right? Pre-COVID era data skewing post-COVID outcomes, right? So that loss of situational reference, and then semantic decay. We simply, have shifts in terminology and context or labeling even, inside of medicine. And so you kind of nailed all of those. So those
That
are
was
exactly the kinds of things I'm talking about.
the semantic one's pretty interesting, actually, because I worked in pharmaceutical commercial structures before. And one of the things that we worked on specifically was introducing new semantics, right, that would favor a particular
Disease.
intervention or
Yeah.
disease type.
Yeah.
And it was very intentional, right? And was very thoughtful, actually. And but it was designed to market and promote the uptake and utilization of particular therapies in the market. And so you can imagine there's semantic decay, and then I wouldn't even call it domain, semantic manipulation that's also happening by different parties.
And as a result, that data decays, right? And I've been there too, right? I've had very similar roles, even in the fair balance copy. That goes along these. I mean, that is especially a key focus area for that type of new or evolving terminology. Yeah.
If we're going to have good data, does that mean data universal, like a universal central, this is the good data and somebody or we all own it, there's some ownership structure of the good data? Or does it mean that there are rules or definitions and ways to define good data that you apply, because data actually is very hard? The ownership of data and who does or doesn't have it and has access to it has been a problem for decades, if not forever, right? So how do we think about the goodness, or how do you think about the goodness of data that way?
Well, look, I'm very optimistic about all of this, right? I'm not anti-tech, I'm anti-exploitation, right? So if we build these twins that we're talking about with this data ethically and transparently and with ownership in the hands of the individual, then they can become like amazing revolutionary tools, right? And so if you imagine a persistent, evolving health model that works for you to detect problems early and adopts your care plan and respects your history, and that happens in every single clinical encounter, that's kind of how we get to that holistic ownership of the data that I'm talking about, because that's what, in my opinion, that's what precision medicine should be. But I don't think we're going to get there unless we have a foundation where we all agree that we need clean data, true consent, and personal control over those things, so that these twins that we're creating, because again, it's not just in healthcare, right? There's a twin of every credit card swipe that you make, every time you click, every Venmo transaction, like all that stuff, right, is building off an ID reference, where Mika's 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm 5, 6, 7, 8, right? And then that is getting paired up ultimately through back-end loops at the data brokers to our health data that we have given, consent to these guys to look at. And that twin, it all should be working for you, not used against you, right? Life is already hard enough. I don't need like a copy of me out in the world where people are trying to make it like even harder for me to get through the day.